What does the binding of Isaac really imply? With the release of DLC Repentance, this question has been pushed back into the limelight. As a highly playable roguelike game, its hunting style and multiple ominous endings all speak to the tragedy behind the game. But unlike the mainstream view, I think the allusion to the binding of Isaac is by no means limited to a critique of religion. The game starts with a sketch that shows us the beginning of the story.
Isaac and his mother lived alone in a small house on a hill. Isaac kept to himself, drawing pictures and playing with his toys as his mom watched Christian broadcasts on the television. Life was simple, and they were both happy. That was until the day Isaac's mom heard a voice from above. "Your son has become corrupted by sin. He needs to be saved." "I will do my best to save him, my lord," Isaac's mother replied, rushing into Isaac's room, removing all that was evil from his life. Again, the voice called to her. "Isaac's soul is still corrupt. He needs to be cut off from all that is evil in this world and confess his sins." "I will follow your instructions, Lord. I have faith in thee," Isaac's mother replied, as she locked Isaac in his room, away from the evils of the world. One last time, Isaac's mom heard the voice of God calling to her. "You've done as I've asked, but I still question your devotion to me. To prove your faith, I will ask one more thing of you." "Yes, Lord, anything," Isaac's mother begged. "To prove your love and devotion, I require a sacrifice. Your son Isaac will be this sacrifice. Go into his room and end his life as an offering to me to prove you love me above all else." "Yes, Lord," she replied, grabbing a butcher's knife from the kitchen. Isaac, watching through a crack in his door, trembled in fear. Scrambling around his room to find a hiding place, he noticed a trapdoor to the basement hidden under his rug. Without hesitation, he flung open the hatch, just as his mother burst through his door and threw himself down into the unknown depths below.
This scene corresponds exactly to the scene in Genesis where Abraham sacrifices Isaac to demonstrate his faith in the Lord. His faith was pure, which is the leap of faith mentioned by Kierkegaard, and Abraham did not know that Isaac would be redeemed. In the book Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard describes the necessity of faith in this way: infinite resignation is the last stage before faith, so that anyone who has not made this movement does not have faith, for only in infinite resignation do I become conscious of my eternal validity, and only then can one speak of grasping existence by virtue of faith. Precisely because resignation is antecedent, faith is no aesthetic emotion but something far higher. It is not the spontaneous inclination of the heart but the paradox of existence. So in the process of sacrificing Isaac, Abraham took a leap of faith. In the Bible, Abraham was already old and had a son, Isaac, after praying to God. Isaac was undoubtedly the most precious thing to him, but when he heard that God had asked him to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham did not hesitate. He was a complete knight of faith. In the game, Isaac, like the biblical Isaac, is unable to understand such faith from a child's perspective, but only fears it. As the only son, Isaac's father had left home long ago, and Isaac was his mother's favorite, just as Abraham was asked by God to kill his favorite son, so in Isaac's eyes, his mother would do the same. But did his mother really want to kill him? The answer is no. The first time you defeat the boss mom's legs, you will accomplish the game for the first time. The ending of the game is that before the mother was about to kill Isaac, the Bible on the bookshelf stunned the mother. Isaac defeated the mother. But the screen suddenly turned into color and the mother with the knife opened the door again. Meaning is by the backward construction. At this moment, as in the Bible, the angel called out to Abraham, stopped him from hurting Isaac, and sacrificed a lamb as a substitute. We can see from the beginning of the game's plot is drawn in a style similar to hand-drawn, which precisely implies that events such as jumping into the basement is Isaac's imagination. The mother may just come with a knife to call Isaac to eat. All sorts of signs indicate the seriousness of Isaac's life problems, family problems, school bullying, religious beliefs, gambling, drug abuse, etc. One of the props Ludovico technique from Stanley Kubrick's film, A Clockwork Orange. Ludovico technique is used in A Clockwork Orange to rehabilitate criminals. The process is probably the prisoner is forced to watch a full day of footage about sex and violence, and was injected with vomit, so that the prisoner associates sex with violence and intense physical discomfort and then becomes a so-called a good person. As an Easter egg, the prop is really an apt description of Isaac's psychological changes in the law of violence. He is like the hero in the movie, as an organic orange was forcibly installed on the clockwork. If Isaac made the behavior that do not match his mother's values, suffering domestic violence will be Isaac's punishment. The game's attack method is that Isaac uses his own tears to attack the enemy. We can see that as we take more and more props, Isaac's body will be more and more bruised. We need to keep hurting ourselves in the game to make ourselves stronger in the game. At this point, it is worth thinking about those children who try to change the outcome of some bad things. Isaac may have the same idea as other children. Here we have to mention the most common monster in the beginning of the game, Gaper. Its appearance is exactly the same as that of our protagonist Isaac, except that the tears shed have become tears of blood. Why does gazing at oneself make one fearful, while gazing at oneself and one's appearance is the same? It is not difficult to associate the scene of Isaac looking at the mirror and questioning himself. In fact, in many endings, Isaac imagines and gazes at himself in the mirror, turning into a demon. Before the infant has a concept of ego, the infant first is aware of himself through misidentification and then integrating the image of the himself through this specular image. The infant establishes the opposition between the ego and the other. Only after recognizing who the other is through the mirror is the infant able to realize who he or she is. This stage is still very unstable, as the infant tries to establish its own identity through the mirror, while wrestling with the specular image in the imaginary. But the introduction of the symbolic puts an end to this confusion, and by entering the symbolic and introducing language, the subject further establishes the ego. The gaze of the other is also a mirror for the infant to recognize the ego, which constantly sends signals of constraint to the ego, and in the gaze of the other, the infant internalizes the specular image into the ego. However, in the image of the monster the Gaper, we see that the image is almost identical to Isaac himself, but with the slightest difference, just a small difference that transforms the specular image into the uncanny valley effect, because the specular image itself is the other, and the subject has internalized it as the self for so long that when you find the effect of the presence of the other's perspective is infinitely magnified. This technique is very common in horror films and life. For example, listening to your own recordings feels strange, taking a picture of yourself but feeling less familiar than in the mirror, etc. This weirdness even made Isaac afraid, so that he imagined the same look of monsters with himself. In Zizek's book The Sublime Object of Ideology, we can see the following understanding. To achieve self-identity, the subject must identify himself with the imaginary other. He must alienate himself, put his identity outside himself, so to speak, into the image of his double. To put it simply, imaginary identification is identification with the image in which we appear likable to ourselves, with the image representing what we would like to be, and symbolic identification with the very place from where we are being observed, from where we look at ourselves so that we appear to ourselves likable, worthy of love. Isaac's ideal ego may have had a fun-loving and painting image, but this image was denied by his mother, who had strong religious beliefs, after his father left home. Isaac looked at himself from his mother's position, denied his own desires, and judged them as sinful and evil. It is for that gaze projected from his mother's point of view that he denies himself, that he derives pleasure from the shattering of the role of Isaac that his mother expects. Grounded in phenomenology, Weyl-Hens uses Lacan's structural theory to clarify 5 structural features of schizophrenia. 1. The body image is experienced consciously and unconsciously as shattered. 2. There are many difficulties with language, such as the deficits in signifier and signified, leading to neologism, and also possible mutism and the veneer of language. 3. The patient wants to play the role of the father to his own mother. 4. Often bothered about his own gender issues. 5. Often with confusion about life and death, and leading to various disturbances related to the experience of time. This was the final mental state of Isaac before his death, schizophrenia. And in Isaac's family of origin, his mother was the embodiment of that big other. It is easy to see that Isaac loved to draw, but his creative behavior was accused by his mother of being evil and going to hell. We know that the subject is stitched to the chain of signifiers. If we point to a table and say it is a table, it is hard to disagree, but for the subject, it is not only easy to disagree when evaluating someone, but the person being evaluated will also question, why should I be like that? That's why symbolic castration is needed, to sew the subject in the chain of signifiers. The act of castration should have been performed by the father in the semiotic sense, but apparently Isaac's father left home after perhaps only doing part of this work. The father's departure allowed Isaac's mother to take the place of the father in the Freudian sense, and the mother would issue the law in the father's place, castrating Isaac in the father's place. These views don't come out from nowhere. We can often see in the ending of The Mother to Tear Isaac's paintings, and even Edmund Macmillan, the game producer himself, also revealed that in his early childhood he was accused of going to hell by his parents, who are religious, just because he drew some cartoons. Isaac in the game begins to blame himself, and he believes that he is guilty. As you can see, in the beginning Isaac's desire was a kind of creative power that was difficult to suppress. This creativity was denied value by his mother, who was a religious person, so Isaac associated these desires with what his mother had told him about the Bible, and he charged them with sin. However, the desire does not disappear because of the existence of the law, but rather a certain limit of the law will make the desire flourish. It is very common for a child to be forbidden by his parents to play a certain game, but the child always continues to play in the absence of the parents, sometimes even being deliberately naughty as a sign of rebellion against this law. When the parents force the child to play this game every day, the child immediately loses interest in it. In this process, the child seems to lose a paradise that can only be experienced in the presence of the law, and this non-existent paradise is always retroactively constructed. But in the case of Isaac, the law was so strong that it exceeded a threshold, and the law brought by Isaac's mother frightened him and created a trauma. To better understand this trauma, we need to introduce the case from Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams. A young boy lived with his parents in the same room for the first few years of his life, and before he learned to speak, he often had the opportunity to observe the sexual activity between his parents. Among the neuroses which immediately followed his first spontaneous ejaculation, the earliest and most troublesome symptom was a sleep disorder in which he was extraordinarily sensitive to the noise during the night, and in which, once he was awakened, he could never fall asleep again. This sleep disorder is a real eclectic symptom. On the one hand, it is a manifestation of his defense against what he discovers during the night. On the other hand, it is an attempt to reconstruct that waking state in which he is able to listen to those impressions. Through this type of observation, the child prematurely developed an aggressive masculinity and began to excite his little genitals with his hands and to use them to sexually attack his mother in order to identify himself with his father. This situation continued until his mother forbade him to play with his genitals and scared him that if he did this again he would tell his father, who would remove his evil organ as a punishment. This threat of castration had such an extraordinarily powerful and traumatic effect on the boy that he gave up sexual activity and developed significant neurosis and sexual impotence after puberty. He did not want to touch his penis anymore and was afraid to approach any female for sexual purposes. This same trauma appears in Isaac, who fears his mother, but does not give up his desires completely as in the previous case. Isaac splits multiple personalities to bear the pain. Because of this he sometimes painted in secret, sometimes blamed himself, and attributed the cause of all the tragedies to his own sins. It was his own desires that led to his parents' divorce. The long suppression of these desires caused Isaac pain. He saw the shadow of himself with two horns. He saw himself in the mirror as a demon, but could not stop the process. That is, while his mother considered his desires sinful, Isaac could no longer suppress his desires, which in the game manifested itself as the inevitable process of becoming a demon. If the full characters of the game are unlocked, there are the following: Isaac, Magdalene, Cain, Judas, The blue baby. Eve. Samson, Azazel. Lazarus, Eden. The lost, Lilith. Keeper, Apollyon. The forgotten, Bethany. Jacob and Esau. Most of these are the sinful people of the Bible. Cain, the killer of his relatives. Magdalene, prostitute. Judas, betrayer. Azazel, demon who stood in the way of Yahweh. Lilith, female demon who tempts humans. Apollyon is the Greek word for Abaddon, the king of epidemics in Revelation. Eve, stealing the forbidden fruit. Samson, love of female sex, betraying the nation. And Eden refers to the Garden of Eden. Lazarus was born again by Jesus after dying of a disease, while Bethany was the place where Jesus was rejected in Jerusalem and welcomed by others, and where Lazarus was born again. Jacob and Esau are the sons of Isaac in the Bible. These figures are either sinful or suggest rebirth and divinity. These characters do not really exist, but are fantasy characters that Isaac himself hid in the chest to bring himself into his game. Obviously, he was greatly influenced by religion. And there are several characters that do not appear in the Bible, which are the blue baby, keeper, the lost, and the forgotten. The keeper corresponds to the image of greed in the 7 deadly sins, appearing as a small boss in the game, unlocked by depositing 999 pennies in greed mode to unlock. The lost is the dead soul of Isaac, the wandering soul. The blue baby in the game is also the boss. We can clearly see that the blue baby and the game's other boss Isaac in all stages almost identical. This precisely shows the blue baby is Isaac himself. The blue color in the game represents suffocation and death. The blue baby is the result of Isaac suffocating to death in the chest. The blue baby represents Isaac's inability to understand the fear that he has died. Death seems to be beyond the perception of Isaac, who was only a child, and suffocating in the chest was the end of Isaac. The long-dead Isaac is left as a skeleton. This ending is reflected in the new ending of the afterbirth. After thinking that Isaac had run away from home, his mother found Isaac, who had become a skeleton after suffocating in the chest. But Isaac died and did not enter heaven, but became a wandering spirit. Why did Isaac hide in the chest to escape reality? It is certainly not only because of religious issues, but also domestic violence. The game's life-enhancing props are breakfast and dinner, and the icons are moldy milk and bread, and even dog food and rotting meat. This implies that the mother does not care about Isaac's life. The game also has many similar props. Tough love icon is a knuckle. After picking it up, the character's image into a bruised face. After picking up the prop cat o' nine tails, the character bruised, and so on. These are hinted at the abuse suffered by Isaac. From the pressure of life is much more than that. From the torn photos, we can find that the photos are always missing the father's figure, as well as the divorce papers. The existence of this prop is to verify the divorce of his parents. Then recall the beginning of the game. Isaac and his mother live alone in the mountains. The father's departure is also one of Isaac's trauma. So where is his father? In the version of Afterbirth, the new ending for Isaac in the box suffocated in the process of constantly looking back on the experience. The burned family portrait, the mother crying alone, all these endings imply that the father left home for some reason. Just in the latest version of the Repentance, this reason is confirmed. Isaac's father secretly spent the family's savings for some reason, so he quarreled with his mother and left home. The game prop's divorce papers also confirmed this suspicion. But is it only the father's problem? No. The props about the mother in the game is also complex and diverse. Mom's coin purse. This prop is to give the character a large number of pills, as well as the game's variety of injections is to suggest that Isaac's mother is addicted to drugs. Perhaps this is why the mother needs to resort to religious beliefs to help herself. But the mother, who has become a fanatical believer, obviously makes the father unhappy, and the father's way of venting is gambling. This must be linked to the ending of another game of Edmund Macmillan, The Legend of Bumbo. The main character, Bumbo, hanged himself because the slot machine did not shake out the money, and the entire of The Legend of Bumbo is actually a board game made by Isaac's father for Isaac. This point in the game, Isaac's mother broke into the door and questioned why Isaac picked up those things he gave you.
Isaac, who were you talking to? Where did you get that stuff? I thought I threw it out. He left us, Isaac. He's gone. He never loved us. Don't you get it?
No, Mama, please.
Isaac, listen to me. It's just us now. It's just us now, Isaac. You and Mama.
Which shows that at this time, the father has left home. And the final boss of the greed mode in the Binding of Isaac is also the hanged Ultra Greed. This image is likely to suggest that the protagonist's father has made a suicide by hanging because of gambling. The game's slot machines, dice and other elements are precisely hints of gambling. Isaac's father is a gambler, and Isaac's mother is a fanatic believer in overdosing. The already not good enough family is further torn apart by various events. The father stole money from his mother's purse while she was asleep was the trigger. Isaac began to associate religion with the Torah and blamed himself for everything that happened. He felt that he was guilty, that his own desires had caused the split between his parents, and that it was all his own sin. The thought process of Isaac can be seen from the paintings on his wall. The cognition of a child cannot know the real reason of things, and he can only blame himself for everything. Isaac can only point all kinds of contradictions at himself, because trauma is the only thing these characters have, and without this trauma, they will face void. This is what Lacan calls a syndrome, and perhaps those who hold on to their depression or a trauma in real life, those are also their syndrome. Isaac will also be pushed to the abyss by the death of his good friend, Guppy. The game has a variety of props: Guppy's head, dead cat, Guppy's tail, Guppy's paw, etc. Even the posthumous paper that appears after each character's death in the game reads, "I leave all that I own to my cat Guppy." We can also see in the ending, Isaac suffocated in the box next to the corpse of the Guppy as company. Isaac dismembered his best friend's body and hid with the corpse into the chest, which was his last port of call to escape reality. This is also why the final level of the game is the chest after experiencing the cathedral or Sheol. This means that Isaac will make all the emotions repressed in the heart of that chest, and then hide in the room of the chest to escape all this. And behind the golden door of the chest is one of the game's final boss, Mega Satan. To open this door needs to kill 2 angels to get the golden key. They are Uriel and Gabriel. In the Bible, bore cherubim and seraphim, respectively. Isaac needs to despise all the justice and goodness that his mother demanded of him, to face those desires that he suppressed to the unconscious level. The game is embodied in the killing of angels, and behind this golden door, Mega Satan awaits Isaac's arrival. During the battle, Mega Satan will continue to release the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the 7 deadly sins and other bosses, which allude to the sinful character and desires that Isaac was asked by his mother to give up. After fighting the boss mom's leg, then you can choose to take the Polaroid or the negative. Choosing the Polaroid, then Isaac ascends to the cathedral after defeating mom's heart. Choosing the negative, then Isaac goes to Sheol after defeating Mama's heart. After ascending into the cathedral, the boss of the cathedral is Isaac himself. After the fall into Sheol, the boss of Sheol is Satan, and the corresponding after defeating Isaac, then enter the chest. After defeating Satan, then enter the dark room. The boss of the chest is the blue baby, and the boss of the dark room is the lamb. It has been said above, the blue baby, that is, Isaac, who suffocated in the box, and what was the lamb? We know that when Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac, an angel appeared to stop him and made Abraham use a lamb from the bush to replace Isaac as the sacrifice. The versions of Isaac through the ages, there is a version named Wrath of the Lamb is corresponding to this scene. And the boss, the lamb, refers to the scapegoat. In the Bible, the lamb is often the embodiment of God, and the 7 seals in Revelation are opened by the lamb. But why is the lamb in Isaac the image of a dark, sinful head with an inverted cross? As already mentioned, if Satan implies Isaac's subject of unconscious, that is, the sinful side that was shouted by his mother. The lamb, then, is the scapegoat that covers up Isaac's sin. This makes Isaac, who is influenced by the religious dualism of good and evil, unconsciously consider the lamb to be evil. Let's sort it out. Isaac went to Sheol, defeated Satan, then defeated the scapegoat and faced the fact that he was guilty, and Isaac admitted his sins, even though they were attached to him from outside. The ending after the defeat of the lamb shows that Isaac has disappeared, at which point it is the embodiment of Isaac locking himself inside the chest. But from the mother's point of view, it is Isaac's disappearance. If player had chosen the cathedral, Isaac would have defeated himself, he would have denied his goodness, and he would not have been willing to suppress his desire to be a so-called good child according to his mother. And after this comes the appearance of the blue baby to make Isaac feel frightened, which is a direct indication that Isaac suffocated and died. But there is a detail: whether you choose the cathedral or Sheol, to go to the chest or the dark room, we can see the golden door, that is, close the door of the Mega-Satan. This seems to foreshadow the presence of the repressed. It is waiting for you behind the door whether you open that door or not. As you can see from the ending, after defeating Mega-Satan, Isaac once again hid in the chest. He kept shifting between self and demon. Finally, he stayed in the appearance of the devil. Isaac's heart was very conflicted. As a child, he could not understand everything around him that caused him pain. So he attributed the result of what happened to his own sin, because his Christian mother had accused him of going to hell for playing around. And when Isaac finally stopped at the appearance of the devil, he not only admitted his sin, but also reproduced his subject of unconscious. If Isaac's way of escaping pain is to enter his own fantasy, then there will be an external force to pull him back into the world of reality. This external force is his mother. When Isaac was immersed in his fantasy, his mother's break-in always made Isaac more disgusted with his mother. But also because he generated a sense of disgust for his mother, more self-blame, Isaac increasingly felt guilty. When the player repeatedly defeats the mother's heart will become a fetal-like heart, that is, it lives. It symbolizes the fetal Isaac, who tries to fantasize about killing his fetal self in order to sever all ties with his mother. This not only includes Isaac's disgust for his mother, but also includes Isaac's disgust for himself due to the influence of the Bible. This psychology is reflected in the final boss Hush of the Afterbirth version. When the player defeats it lives within 30 minutes, a crack will appear in the wall of the womb, and once inside is a blue flesh-like tube leading deeper. The player jumps in and then enters the blue womb. If the womb suggests the womb that gave birth to Isaac's life, then the blue womb represents Isaac's dead embryo. Why does Isaac fantasize about returning to his mother's womb? It is because of the death drive. The concept of the death drive was first introduced by Freud in 1920 in Beyond the Pleasure Principle. In his first discussion of the death drive in 1938, Lacan described it as a desire to return to a lost state of harmony, a desire to return to the pre-Oedipus state of mingling with the mother's breast. The return of Isaac to the womb in the game is a manifestation of the death drive, just like the longing for the unseparated state of mother and child before weaning, which arises retroactively after the baby is weaned. We have already known that the color blue represents suffocation and death. The blue womb is a visualization of Isaac's embryo suffocating in the amniotic fluid and dying. Isaac imagined the phenomenon of Hush because he would have preferred to have died in the womb and never been born. There are rumors that Hush represents Isaac's unborn sister, but Edmund Macmillan himself denied this speculation. The appearance of the second stage of Hush is a stillborn child, and the first stage is almost identical to the blue baby's appearance and attack style. When the player defeats Hush, the room will still appear in the passage of the cathedral and Sheol. Defeating Hush is a seemingly optional process, but is it really so? Only Hush has the 100% ability to open the void in the entire game, and the void is where the final boss of the Afterbirth, Delirium, is located. The void is an unstable layer, where all the terrain we've experienced and all the bosses we've killed appear randomly. One of the final bosses, Delirium, turns into all the bosses we've killed and is an enhanced version of the ability. When Isaac saw the blue baby, his mental instability at the time was already unstable, while Hush had the 100% ability to open the void. This has made it clear that Isaac was schizophrenic after trying to deny his existence in fantasy. We can often see the snow in the multiple endings of Isaac. The effect of the game's prop clicker is to turn the characters into other characters, and the use of the screen effect is accompanied by snow sound and screen. Snow screen means transformation and change. Delirium Attack is also accompanied by a large number of snow screen and sound effects. These elements are suggesting that Isaac's mental world has been very unstable. Isaac as a cognitive child is not yet sound, long suffering from domestic violence, religion, the influence of drugs, and Isaac himself and the religious influence of sin as the law for a long time to suppress their desires. Schizophrenia is the end of Isaac before he died. In the DLC, Repentance, Isaac can unlock the true ending after defeating the final boss Mother. Let's analyze the ending after defeating Mother. In the ending, Isaac was happily drawing on the floor, while his mother once again broke into the house and grabbed Isaac's drawing. The mother saw the monster-like mother drawn by Isaac. She angrily questioned Isaac whether she was a monster in Isaac's mind, and then allowing no explanation, she put Isaac in the utility room to make Isaac confess. And Isaac, who was crying in the utility room, the shape of Satan behind him became more and more clear. Let's see what the final boss Mother looks like. Exactly the same as the mother in Isaac's painting. Whether in the early version of the game or in the poster of the game, the image of the mother is always holding a knife. It is not, as many people say, that children do not understand, they draw it for fun, but the children's fantasy paintings reflect the real thoughts of Isaac, the emergence of the unconscious, although the existence of the law makes the desire repressed, but what is repressed is not only the desire, but also a truth, the fear and disgust of the mother. As Lacan's view, the repressed will return. Something continues to sound out of sight. Something repressed, hidden in the toy box, behind the golden door, still exists. In this ending, the mother has a line, "You are just like your father," indicating that Isaac's father has divorced his mother, and Isaac's mental condition is getting worse and worse. The Satan behind the weeping Isaac gradually cleared, which shows that Isaac's guilt and subject of unconscious is not able to function normally. Isaac is developing towards schizophrenia. After defeating Mother, the player can open a door at the depths by getting the Polaroid or the negative gotten by defeating Mom Stump. From this door you can enter the mausoleum. But not like at the Mother's, there is no boss at Boss Room, only a note. It is named Dad's Note. When you get the note, the player will begin ascent, not deeper as in the previous ending. When ascent, the character emerges from the boss room, finds the light pillar in the initial room of each layer and continues ascending the previous level. During this period, the levels passed are the previous levels, so no props appear. The player's screen is covered with a layer of yellowish retro effects, suspected of imitating old photos. When players keep ascending to the beginning of the game to write the operation of the teaching room, Isaac will return to his real home. And in this layer, Isaac has to face only one enemy. And that is Dogma. Dogma has two forms. The first stage is embryo-like connected to the TV. And it is invincible. Only the attack on the TV is effective. The second form is Dogma Angel. We can see that the first stage of Dogma can release attacks similar to the prop Godhead. Why Dogma can put out attacks with Godhead? We combine the English Dogma in reverse, and that becomes, I am God. Only the big other who designates Dogma is God and has Godhead. Or rather, the Dogma that convinces everyone is originally God. Let's take a look at the lyrics of the music in the background of the TV during the battle with the Dogma.
God is in the light, then we have fellowship with each other, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. If we claim we have no sin, we are only fooling ourselves and not living in the truth. But if we confess our sins to him, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all wickedness.
All of these dogmas suggest the sinfulness of Isaac's behavior. In Isaac's eyes, the dogma in the TV was what he really detested. And he even imagined that his mother had produced an embryo with the TV, and this embryo was the dogma. Lacanian psychoanalysis has this account of the mother-child binary relation. The mother is initially the infant's big other because she carries the infant's needs. And the infant needs to satisfy the big other's affirmation by behaving obediently, being good, etc., to ensure that the infant's own needs can be met. But when this stage is over, the infant discovers that the mother is not omnipotent, that the mother is also a person stitched to symbolic networks and social relations. that she too has to work to earn money, etc. The social law then takes the place of the mother in the mother-child binary relation and becomes the real big other, and the social law becomes the big other who possesses the mother and has the symbol of phallus.
This argument also applies to single-parent or father-only families, since the above-mentioned mothers are in a semiotic position.
At this point, it is easy to understand the symbolic meaning of the embryonic form of dogma. The attack on the TV in the first stage is useful perhaps precisely because the ideology that Isaac's mother received all came from the TV. And Dogma's second stage soars from the TV, as if to make it clear that the TV is only a channel for spreading ideology and not the noumenon. It is not surprising why Isaac would bring his mother into the story of Abraham. Because in Isaac's view, his mother loved religion more than he did.
In contrast, today, when modernization is strongly promoting scientific realism, do we really not believe in God anymore?
After defeating the dogma, the game did not end. The game animated the dogma into the shape of a cross, and Isaac seemed to absorb the divinity of the dogma, twinkling from the blue baby, the forgotten to the lost. But Isaac still changed back into his own form and grew angel wings. Everything around began to crumble, at which point Isaac realized he was in the purgatory. And a beast emerged from the rolling sulfur in the distance, and next to the beast were the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse:
Famine, pestilence,
war, death. In the book of Revelation, the Lamb unveils those 7 seals, while the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are the first 4 seals. The 3-eyed demon, however, is not given an exact name in the game.
but when we check the catalog, we can learn its name, the beast.
We can guess that it refers to the 7 10-headed beast that appears in the Revelation in the 7th seal after the 4 apocalypses. The first 4 seals of the Revelation correspond to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The 5th seal is God's curse on the world, the 6th seal is God's salvation of the saints, and the 7th seal is the 7 angels descending to blow the 7 trumpets corresponding to disasters, and the beast on the last one of these 7 trumpets. The beast in the game's image of the lower body wearing Isaac's mother's clothes. The second stage of her dogma will also flash the face of the beast. In the minds the one chasing Isaac is also the mother's face. These stitched together is always the signifier, mother. And after defeating the beast, we can see the end of Isaac's ascent. The sky ripped open a big mouth, a white lightning speeding down to smash the mother of harlots. When Isaac flew to the open sky, he sought his whole life. His mother wept as she held his remains. His father left without looking back. His father stole the money from his wallet while his mother slept, and his parents' late-night arguments kept him awake. He thought he was the cause of all this misfortune and sin, and he suffered until he couldn't sleep at night. He saw his own shadow waiting for him in the toy box. As he continued to rise, he felt fear and worry being stripped from his body as he flies faster and faster. He sought his only companion, Guppy, alive. He saw his parents happily embracing. He sought his mother kissing his forehead and telling him that someone had blessed him. He sought his parents leaping for joy at his birth. Further on, he saw nothing else. At this point, the magnetic narrator continues.
Are you sure this is how you want this story to end, Isaac? You're the one writing it. It doesn't have to end this way. Here, how about we tell it a different way? Maybe a happy ending?
Okay, Daddy.
Good. Are you getting sleepy yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so...
And so the familiar story begins again. Isaac and his parents lived in the small house. This may seem like everything is a story told by Isaac's father. But in reality, according to Edmund Macmillan, Isaac is indeed dead. We can speculate that this is the moment when Isaac is reunited with his father after his death, and the father is repenting for what he has done and trying to let Isaac's soul rest in peace. It was mentioned earlier that the father may have hanged himself after leaving home because of gambling. Isaac abandoned his constant fears, the blue baby and the lost, during his ascent, all of which Isaac could not understand and was deeply involved in the existence. But this time Isaac's ascent expresses Isaac out of the fear of the reality that he had died, out of the confusion of where he was going. He was relieved. and this is not inevitably also a good ending. So was Isaac really guilty, and did he deserve the results he received? Not really. All the sufferings Isaac suffered were meaningless. Job in the book of Job, who was a believer in God, lost everything because of a bet between God and Satan. But Job's theological friends kept persuading Job, "You deserve your suffering, you must be guilty." It is the same as the story of Abraham, where Isaac was almost sacrificed just because God wanted to test Abraham's faithfulness. Was Isaac's addicted believer mother, gambling father, and the bullying he received bound to happen and make sense? Suffering is meaningless. Of course, we cannot know what God wants from us, because there is no God. Slavoj Zizek, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology. But the story of Isaac does not only tell us the tragic story of a child in a religious family. Even now, there are still thousands of Isaacs in the world. The culprit for this is not religion, but some other ideology. Imagine a child born in a modern society. If it is a boy, then regardless of his character or sexual orientation, his parents are always telling him from an early age to be a man, not to cry, to be a man, to be a hero, and so on and so forth. If it is a girl, regardless of her personality or sexual orientation, is bound to receive girls to be graceful, to be good, to be obedient, to be a lady, and other voices. It is as if people are no longer people, but some kind of processed products. The angles that have infinite meaning are deliberately castrated, and everything is colored the same. These children, whose social roles are determined from childhood, have their subjectivity eroded little by little, turning into an insensitive cog with a pre-programmed link. The irony is that even in the eyes of modern people who think that religion is backward, they never see these pre-modern aspects of modern society, as if everything is rich in science and humanity and everything is still in order. Just now, all around us, the tragedy of Isaac is playing out again. Isaac and his mother lived in a city apartment.